I don't know where you are in life right now or where it is you want to go. But if you are a curious soul like me, I know this about you. You are searching for greatness in life. You desire financial freedom, and you ask yourself daily how you can master success in business without wasting years of your life. On this show, we're going to interview all the leading experts and influencers in the fields of marketing, mindset, and sales to expose all the tips and tricks you need to accelerate your business and amplify your success. My name is Reem Kharbat, and this is the Entrepreneur Accelerator. Hey everybody, and welcome back to the Entrepreneur Accelerator. And this is Reem, and I'm super excited for this upcoming episode. I really had so much fun doing it, and I really believe that you will enjoy it, especially if you are interested in starting your podcast someday, which I believe you should. Well, my guest, Matt Johnson, he's the author of the MicroFamous book, which is a complete guide on how to attract audience, build influence, and become famously influential to the right people. Matt is a marketing agency founder. He's a podcaster, a musician, and he runs a podcast launch and production agency based in San Diego, an international team that helps business coaches, consultants, and thought leaders use done-for-you podcasting to attract an audience, build influence, and become micro-famous. He's been featured in many top podcasts, including Boss Moms with Dana Malstaff, and he's a frequent podcast guest and event speaker to audiences around the US, Canada, and Australia. Matt was amazing during that episode. We had so much fun, and I advise you truly to jump in and listen to this episode, especially, as I said, if you are interested in podcasting. He has so many interesting things to say about that. So without further ado, let's go ahead and listen to the next episode. Enjoy. Welcome, Matt. Thank you so much for being here on this show. I'm so happy that you're here.
I am too. It's going to be a really fun conversation. We got to chatting behind the scenes before we hit record,
Yes.
And we had so much fun. We decided, well, we at some point we need to hit record and just have
Exactly.
an actual podcast.
You know, I'm telling you, because when like two podcasters together, I think the fun is contagious, and there are a lot of things to talk about and to gossip, and especially me now, as we said, like drinking coffee in the middle of the night in Saudi Arabia. And just being a little bit jealous from you being in San Diego in a nice place and getting the chance to walk on the beach where I'm just sitting all day here. No, I'm just jealous a little bit. So welcome and thank you.
I've got people all over the world that work for our agency, and so I get a little bit of insight into what's going on in all the different parts of the world, like South Africa and the Philippines, and there's I'm very glad by complete accident I ended up locked down in a place that is fairly easy to get out and still get some sun and try to enjoy your life while this whole thing blows over, because not everybody is as fortunate.
Exactly. And how are you coping with all the craziness? Like, what are you doing? You're not scared or worried?
I'm not. Now, granted, I don't have kids and I don't live with anyone that's at risk, right? So that makes a difference, right? So I do want to acknowledge that, it hasn't hit me as hard. You know, my parents are 1,000 miles away, and they're continuing to hang out and live life as normal. They live in a state that hasn't been locked down and hasn't had a lot going on. As far as the business side, I've been very fortunate that we haven't had many cancellations. We haven't had people really pull back on their marketing budgets. All of my clients are business coaches, author, speaker types. And so we had a lot of them that had their speaking events get canceled, but they very quickly shifted into doing like virtual summits, more webinars, getting featured on more podcasts. And they recognized the value of having a podcast. So rather than pull back, they went further down and said hey, how do I get on more podcasts? Like I have all this time because I'm not speaking anywhere. I can't travel. So let's do more. And then we've been signing up new clients as well that have decided to take this time to launch a new podcast while they're basically stuck at home. So it's a good niche to be in, but it's also good just to serve high level, sophisticated, savvy people that were prepared for some sort of downturn this year already. I don't think anybody could prepare for the way this was, but I do have clients that were already prepared for some sort of economic downturn. And so
Mm.
the fact that it came through the virus was the only thing that was unique about it. They were already prepared for something to happen. So that was, that's a good thing about serving the right people.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
that's great. So if you can just tell our audience a little bit more about you, about your agency, and what is it exactly that you're doing? How did you even get into this field?
So short story. So basically what I do now is I run an agency where all of us are a team of specialists that help produce and launch podcasts. Um, I run that in about 3 hours a week. So it's a multi
Mm.
six-figure digital agency, basically, that's all virtual. Um, and I got there by jumping into live video like 5 years ago. I was working at another agency and I was just some guy managing clients, and I got into business development, and they started putting me onto hosting live webinars on Google Hangouts. And I started to get the opportunity to be on these live webinars with the heavy hitters in the real estate space, which is the space that agency was running
Yeah.
in. And one of those guys called me up behind the scenes after a couple months of doing these live webinars and said, "Hey, like, why don't we launch a podcast together?" And I
Mm.
had already been thinking about pitching him the same idea. So it was the perfect timing. He beat me to it by like a week. And that was 5 years ago. Today, that podcast is still running. It's called Real Estate Uncensored. It has like 1.5 million downloads and a bunch of accolades, and it hits the top 15 and 20
Awesome.
lists of all the real estate podcasts and yada, yada. But in running that show, at one point we were doing like 2 and 3 days a week. I had launched 2 other shows in the real estate space by that time. I was co-hosting all of them. I was doing like 5 to 8 hours of live video podcasting a week. And so I
Mm.
started to build out a team behind me to do all the back end stuff. And then people
Mm.
started to ask me how I was doing all this content. And I would just tell them about the team that I built. And they would be like, "Well, that sounds like awesome. Like, can I rent them when you're not using them?" Right.
Mm.
So it kind of started like that. And then of course that worked for a while. And then it grew to the point where that broke. And then I had to actually turn it into a real agency.
Yeah.
And I got rid of all the coaching consulting stuff I was doing in the real estate space and just went all in on being an agency owner.
That is awesome, especially that after I joined this field, like, I also, what a coincidence. I also have my main business is in real estate. We developed a property management software company, and um, and then I moved to the online world to as a business coach. I have like over 15 years of experience as a CFO and a business strategist, so my whole life is around this, but it was nice for me to move into the online space. And at that time, at least here in this part of the world, podcasting was not very popular, let's say. But I was really always attracted to the concept of having a podcast or having a show. And I never liked being on a video.
Yeah.
Like, I don't feel comfortable on a video. I don't feel comfortable, just standing, and I feel it's just, I prefer talking. And I think you felt that. So
we could talk for a long time.
yes. And then when I realized that I can as a person, because I spoke to many coaches and entrepreneurs, and they think that for you to start a show or a podcast, you need a big budget. Only, let's say, rich people, or you need to have a crew behind you to have a podcast or to have your show. But then I realized that you don't really have to have this big budget to start your podcast, but the problem is maybe being consistent. So with your agency, like, how can we explain more to entrepreneurs and coaches what are the benefits, seriously, of having a podcast? Because I can speak from my own experience, but you have dealt with so many clients, and I know that you've seen their, let's say, objections and their fears of starting a show. Um, how can we explain to, let's say, my audience who are entrepreneurs, coaches and consultants, small business owners, that having a podcast, especially at this time, should be a must? Like, I believe in that. What do you think? And based on the people that you have dealt with, how can we tell them what is the importance of having a podcast now?
Well, I would start with the fact that there's so many coaches, consultants, small business owners that the primary way that they meet new clients is they have to meet them in person. Sometimes that
Yeah.
means networking, sometimes it means speaking events and even keynoting, right? But there's a lot of people that that's their primary way to attract new clients is they've got to be face to face. And unfortunately, like the time that we're living in, basically that's completely wiped out. And so a lot
Yeah.
of people are being forced to revisit and find another way. Now, the people that have already been into the podcasting world kind of know what the benefits are, which is you have something to fall back on if you can't go do speaking engagements and networking events, but it goes way beyond that. Um, One of the things that podcasting allows you to do and even forces you to do is get really, really clear on why people should hire you. So if you're used to meeting people through speaking or you're used to meeting people at networking, they can get the sense that they know, like, and trust you. And a lot of times
Mm,
that's enough. And if you do
true.
enough networking events and speaking events, you don't need, you feel like you don't need much more than that, right? Because you've got skills, right? I meet
Yeah.
people, I use my sales skills, and I make sales. With podcasting, you have to get really clear on why people should hire you. So you have to refine down the whole idea that your business is based on into something that actually gets attention, because you can't just rely on the fact that you can use your face-to-face speaking
Mm,
skills or sales skills.
mm,
So the people that do the best at podcasting are the ones that do the best job of figuring out what I would call the clear and compelling idea for their business. What is
mm.
that problem that you solve, and how do you solve it, to the point where when you deliver that to someone in 1 to 2 sentences, their response should be, holy cow, really? Like,
Yes.
I didn't know that existed. You do that, right? So like
Mm,
if you're talking about a property management software and you go up to somebody that has a portfolio of 1,000 doors, and you say, look, I have a property management software that does XYZ without costing you any time and money. You can literally get ramped up and running in 2 weeks, and it will cut your expenses, your management expenses, in 30%. It's going to save you tens of thousands a year. The response should be, seriously? Holy cow, I didn't know that existed. You got to tell me more about that. And so what podcasting does is it really forces you to get 100% clear on what that idea is. And if you can
yeah.
deliver that, you can make sales and you'll attract clients online. If you can't do that, then it reveals that it's a symptom of the fact that you don't have that idea as razor sharp as you might think.
Yeah, yeah, that's awesome. I saw that your podcast, which is MicroFamous,
Mhm.
you've been talking mainly about marketing, and you show a lot of marketing tips and strategies for like how to grow also your business, which is like there are many episodes that I loved, and you guys, I think you have to seriously go and check it out because it's really awesome. The idea of microfamous, what, how did you come up with the idea? What does it mean to be microfamous?
So to be micro famous means that you are, instead of being like Tom Cruise famous, where you can't go to the
Yeah.
grocery store without signing autographs, right? It means to be really famously influential to just the right people, right? The people
Mm,
that you most want to serve and impact. One of the best examples is one of my clients who hosts a podcast with us. And he and I were booked on the same event, right? So we were speaking at the same event. And I noticed that, number one, he was booked to speak. He was one of the most anticipated speakers at that event. He doesn't sell a bunch of coaching. He doesn't travel around the country. Like, by all means, if you didn't know that he was so influential, you might not even know his name, even if you're in his
mm,
space. But you show up at that event, and in between every single session, he was mobbed by a group of people
mm,
asking questions about the business, trying to get his advice, trying to get his attention, right? And half the people there were like, out of all the speakers that they were there to see, he was the one they were most looking forward to hearing talk, right? To me, that's the level of influence that would be where most of us would want to be. Like, most of us would not want to have to go to the grocery store and worry about taking pictures of us. But if we show up at an industry event, we would
yeah.
want that level of influence. We'd want people running up to us and going, hey, like, when's your breakout session? I'm super excited about it. Like, hey, do you have a few minutes in the hallway in between sessions? I want to pick your brain about stuff. Like, that's that kind of level of influence that most of us can build a multi 6 or 7 figure business on. And I started to see that with my clients, and podcasting helps that, and it gives you that national level. So when you show up at an event like that, those types of things happen. But in between
Mm,
events like that, you also get the sales calls where people call up and go, hey, I've been listening to your podcast for 6 months. I love everything you do. I'm ready to sign up. right? And
Yeah,
that's one of the very first things you notice about being a podcast host if you're selling coaching or consulting is your sales calls start to change. They
true.
change from you persuading the other person to the other person knowing you and showing up already planning to do something, and now you get to start qualifying them to see if they're a good fit for you, which is
So
that's fun.
exactly. So it's just like, as you said, as if like you're speeding up the process of the like and trust and knowledge, or knowing you. So you
Hmm.
are immediately like an authority in your field, and people will immediately just run to you. It's true, because sometimes I get messages and I was like surprised that people who I don't know are just sending me and telling me that we have listened, and you inspired us with so many things. So it's it's really interesting how podcasting would put you as an instant authority in what you're doing. My question, Matt, is that do you think that anyone can have a show?
Mm.
Not technically, but is it like anyone can just pull a show?
I think so. Yeah, we've grown from 500,000 podcasts on iTunes a couple of years ago to now close to 1 million. Um, it's exploded, but we have to
Yeah,
remember there's something like 150 million blogs, maybe more.
yeah,
So the ceiling for growth is insane. Like if you ask somebody 20 years ago if everyone could have a blog, they would tell you no. That's how many people are qualified to write and can write 3 to 4 articles a week and be a blogger. Now there's 150 million of them. So I think podcasting is going to be very much the same way. And the best is going to be the cream that rises to the top. I think that's the way it is in every
true.
field. If you're really good at it, you're going to find an audience and you're going to have a bigger audience than somebody that's not as good at it. But I do think podcasting is one of those things where um, somebody that was in radio for 20 or 30 years said this, that being in radio is just a matter of repetitions. You just got to get the reps. The more you do it, the better
Mm,
you get at it. And I think
yeah,
that applies just as much to podcasting. So if you get into it and you've been listening to your favorite podcast for a couple of years, you just have to recognize you're not going to feel like you're as good as the podcasters you listen to, but that's true of everything.
I
And
agree.
it's something that will, you'll get better as you go along, and you'll look back, a year into podcasting, and you realize, wow, I've come a long way. My show sounds completely different than my first
True.
episode, and that's a good thing.
I agree. I'm laughing because I remember also my first episode that was like really uh, horrible for me. Like yourself, how you feel like you're stressed, and so yeah, I can imagine
Oh,
that
you mean
feeling.
like the way your first interview felt to you?
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah. Oh, yeah. You must have been
exactly.
nervous as hell because that was Elena Cardone, right?
Yes, exactly. Not just because of she's Elena, and I I was reading everything. Like I was so scared. I didn't want to mess up. And then I realized that hey, you can just edit things. Like it's like
Yes, you
easy.
can.
I, and exactly. Oh my god.
That's true.
But
Yeah, like I got started in live video. I didn't have any room for error, so I can remember,
exactly.
those first, like when I first got started, I did YouTube lives, and then my co-host and I were one of the very first ones to jump on Facebook Live.
Mm,
Even before the actual Facebook Live went live, there were some integrations with other companies, and we were the first to jump on them. So I've always been doing a lot. Like that's nerve wracking. You start because you can actually watch the
yes.
audience numbers fluctuate, so when you're losing people's attention. That's a weird
I
thing to keep an
know.
eye on. But I don't get nervous about it anymore. And one of my mentors reminded me of how bad I was freaking out before I did my first live webinar. And I literally have no memory of it. I don't remember. It's fantastic. So yeah, if anybody's nervous, and I think you'll feel this way,
Yeah.
not too long from now, is you'll just jump on a podcast and you won't even think about it. And you'll forget all about how nervous you used to be.
Yeah. Matt, I received this question so many times, and I'm sure that you received it like even more. How can you monetize your podcast? Or why are you podcasting? Like, okay, some people
Hmm.
might listen and maybe not. So how can you monetize that? Especially when at the beginning you don't have so much listeners or following and you're building that following. So um people think that it's just maybe a tool of publishing, because you have to keep on publishing, whether it's just posting or maybe uh, shooting a video or something. But
Hmm.
what are the ways that would attract people to even start thinking seriously more about podcasting? Like, how can we get money of that?
Well, I think before you jump into podcasting, you have to have a very clear vision of how that money is going to come back to you. The clients that I work with tend to have a higher ticket coaching consulting offer, or they're a professional speaker, you know, a minimum of $5,000 speaking engagement. Um, or they're selling like a membership program where they
Mm,
have, but they already have a big audience. And so they're, you know, launching a podcast to kind of nurture that audience and get them to sign up for membership. If you have those things in place before you start podcasting, it makes it way easier. I did it all backwards myself
mm,
and suffered the consequences, right? I started a podcast for the fun of it because I wanted to hang out and talk with my co-host about real
yeah.
estate. Then we started working on offering coaching and products on the back end, and we weren't quite sure what people wanted. So we dabbled in everything: sponsorships, low price
Mm,
products, higher dollar coaching, affiliate marketing, promoting other people's stuff. We did everything. The thing that worked the best for us was we found a company on the real estate side where we were able to do nothing but send them people who wanted to switch over to that brokerage, and then we make a cut of the commissions. So we stopped
oh,
selling anything on the front end where people were actually giving us cash. We just started promoting a company, and that gives us commissions on the back end. So that's an option. I would say for most people, though, I feel very strongly about it. You know, like I read the 4 Hour Work Week years ago, like a lot of other people
yeah.
did, and thought that the way to make it online was a product based business. That's insanely hard. It's actually way, way,
Mm,
way, way, way easier to start a service business where you can start delivering the service first, and then you gradually hire people who can work for you and take over most of that stuff, which is what I did. That's
mm,
infinitely easier than starting a product based or a software based business. So for most people, if you have a service to sell, a podcast is the perfect way to promote it because you monetize the podcast by telling people what your service is, and people go sign up for
exactly.
your service. And that way offsets the cost of running a podcast. So to me, if you run a service business, it's a total no brainer. And that's the fastest, easiest way to monetize your show.
Yeah. So that's really interesting because, again, I'm telling you, a lot of people are telling me, we would love to have a podcast, but we really don't know if we should do that because it's time consuming,
Mm-hmm.
and we don't know how to bring traffic to it. And at
Mm-hmm.
the same time, how can I get money out of it? Like,
Yeah.
what? So there are like some concerns. Um, but for me, I think, as you said, first of all, I really love the 4 Hour Work Week, and it's one of the, like, one of so like, I read so little, but
Mm-hmm.
there's these some books that really shaped my life, which is Rich Dad Poor Dad, 4 Hour Work Week, Think and Grow Rich. These things, but mainly 4 Hour Work Week is my target because eventually we want to, or at least for me, to work just a few hours a year, maybe not, not even a week.
Yeah.
um so yeah, that's an awesome book. But again, the concept of how to monetize, and is your agency, you said that you're having this model of done for you, you help people build their podcast. Do you help them with the strategy on how to start and grow and monetize, or just launching a podcast, hit the top charts, for example, or something like that? I don't know.
No, we don't worry about chart position at all. In fact, if somebody comes in and they're worried about chart position, that's usually a big red flag for me because it means they're more concerned about being macro famous than micro famous. That's part of why I wrote the book,
Okay.
is I want to attract the people that are way more concerned with like getting a smaller group of people to take action rather than just have a lot of followers online. So that's a red flag for me. So to answer the question about like the podcasting, um, I mean, it really goes back to what I talk about in the book, which is the clear and compelling idea. If you have that, the podcast becomes like a vehicle to just deliver that idea over and over and over and over again to the right people. And there's a small percentage of those people that are going to be ideal clients right now,
Mm,
but that's not most people. You know, if you go to 100 potential clients, you know, you might sign up 3 of them, right? What happens to the other 97? Well, they need to be nurtured. They could be nurtured, and they could be, you know, put into some sort of an incubator where they would eventually become an ideal client for you. Most people don't do that. They go and they try to find another 100 people to talk to. But
Yeah.
if you take that same 100 people and you say, okay, 97 of those people aren't ready to sign up right now, but they could be. The question is, how do you get them ready over the
Mm.
next 6 to 12 months to the point where they're ready to sign up? And to me, that answer is a podcast. And that's one of the highest and best uses of a podcast, is as an incubator for ideal
Yeah.
clients. It's
Yeah.
not a vehicle to get the most number of eyeballs on your content. So I'll give you an
Mm.
example. One of my clients, and this is before she actually came to us and our agency to start a show, she put an offer in front of her email list. Her email list was about 500 people, and she made 40K in coaching
Mm.
program signups off of a list of 500 people. Most coaches and consultants or info product people in the online space would tell you 500 people is nowhere near enough. Like, you need
Yes.
double, triple. You need 5,000 people on your list before you bring in them an offer. And she's like, no, $40,000 in sales off of a 500
Yeah.
email list. And that's how I look at podcasting. Is there's a lot of power in the right people, and it doesn't have to be a lot. The industry that I came from, the residential real estate side, there are multiple 7-figure coaching companies, a multi-million-dollar agency that I used to work for, and two of my clients run multi 6 and 7-figure coaching businesses in a space where there's no more than 10,000 potential clients for any
Oh,
of them.
wow.
Same
Mm.
space, right? 10,000 people, multiple 7-figure companies, right? So if you think about it that way, I look at it in terms of like, look, if I've got 5,000 friends on Facebook, if those are the right friends, I don't need anybody else.
I agree.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. You're right. uh,
But we do spend a lot of time chasing
I know.
eyeballs and attention. And,
I know.
if we don't have 10,000 people on Instagram, we can't get that swipe up feature. Like, you're not one of the cool kids at the event.
But
Yeah.
again, yes, you're right. I mean, like, this is, again, it's all about perspective. And this is how
Yeah.
the media and everything else, um, how it makes you look at things, and it's like they're incepting these ideas in your head. So
Mm-hmm.
the blonde slim girl is the beautiful and good or worthy one. That's right. Like,
Mm-hmm.
this is how they make us feel. And the same thing,
Yeah.
if you don't have the 5, 10,000, and if you don't have the swipe up thing, that means that you're still not as good. And
I know. I
I mean,
reject
it's
all of
true.
it. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, you're
Yeah.
good. You're a good person, I think.
Yeah. I've, well, it helps to know this. And I don't know if you found this out already, but if you don't already, you will, the more people that you interview, because that's exactly how I found this out, which is you start talking to people on podcast interviews that have, let's say, 500,000 followers on Twitter, or they have 300,000 followers on Instagram, or they get millions of downloads for your podcast. And then you find out behind the scenes, they can't sell them something to
Mm,
save their
mm,
life, right?
mm,
They're not in the 2 Comma Club. Like, that does not happen automatically. So you start talking to people that have big social media audiences or big email lists or big downloads of their podcast, and they just keep trying new stuff, trying to figure out what in the world do these people want to buy. Well, it's because they went
mm,
all backwards. They created something that got attention, but they didn't know what what they wanted to sell them. They didn't start with any sort of belief system or any vision of where they wanted to lead people, right? And so they end up with something that gains attention, but they don't know how to sell them anything because they don't really know what they want people to do. They don't know what journey they want to take people on to begin with. They're just trying to find something to sell to them. And I ran into a lot of those people on podcast interviews. And so once you see that, it kind of breaks your brain, and it breaks that belief that in
yeah.
order to have a successful business, I have to have hundreds of thousands of followers. But you need to see both sides. You have to see people that are succeeding with small audiences and then failing with big audiences in order for it to finally register and sink in that's not the way you can do it without it. You can do it without a big
Yeah.
audience. It's more about having the right people than it is about having lots of people.
Love it. Matt, what are the main, let's say, the main mistakes that podcasters are doing when they are starting their podcast?
Mm, I think most of the battles for whether a podcast grows or not, that battle is won or lost before a podcast ever hits iTunes. And that's actually why I wrote the book, because I had people coming to me where they thought podcasting was the solution, right? The
Mm.
podcasting is a magic way to get in front of thousands or tens of thousands of people for effectively free. And that's not
Yeah.
true. There's so many podcasts, and there's only so many podcast listeners, and they probably already have their favorites. And maybe one of them is your competitor, right? It's the coach or the consultant that's your competitor. So you're asking people to switch off of something else and start listening to your show, which means you got to get the strategy right. Right.
Mm.
So the whole book was about leading people, especially in the first third of the book. That's all about the strategy. It's about getting the strategy of your thought leadership business right, so that when you start a podcast, the podcast is attractive, like super, super magnetically attractive to the right people, because they resonate with the ideas that you're putting out there. Because it's not about all the tactical stuff of podcasting. It's not about how you promote it on social media. Like, there's only so much you can do. The real question is, are you creating something that makes somebody want to share your podcast with another person?
Mm.
Right?
Mm.
That's the key, right? Because podcast, like 65% of podcast growth comes from word of mouth. So if people aren't talking about your podcast,
Wow.
you're already out 2/3 of the way that podcasts grow. There's only so much you can do with that other 30% to get your podcast to grow. The bottom line is, you've got to make a podcast that's worth talking about. And so that's why it's so important to get the strategy right and create something. Like, you got to know exactly who you're serving, and you've
Mm.
got to create a show that they are looking for and can't find anywhere else right now. So if that
Okay.
means right? So you got to figure out, okay, what are they looking for on YouTube? What other podcasts are they listening to right now where they're actually sifting through a bunch of episodes to find one that they love? You know what I'm
Mm.
saying? Like, if your audience is listening to Entrepreneurs on Fire, that's a 7-day-a-week show. What episodes are they skipping to get to this? And you do more of those. Like, you find that little niche where people are underserved or overlooked or neglected, and you go, I'm going to create a show for them. Now, the question is, if you do that, who do you pick? Who are the right people? And that's what I talk about in the book. Like, it's better to go after the ultra high end, sophisticated, smart, successful end of the market. Like, if you're going to go small, but go high end. Go to the affluent, go to the people that are the early adopters, go to the people that are really successful in an industry, and go after them. Because coincidentally, they also have the most money to pay you.
Yeah. Yeah.
Funny how
Wow.
that works, right? So I
Yeah.
think,
Weird.
but if you follow Gary Vee and Russell Brunson and a lot of that, and I don't think it's any ill intention on their part, but what people take away from listening to those people all the time is, okay, I need to get a big audience and sell something low cost. I
Mm.
did the exact opposite. I
Mm.
went very small audience, very high cost. And that gives me an extremely stable business built around clients that are super stable in and of
More
themselves
focused.
and more focused. So I'm able to get really razor sharp clear with what my podcast is about and what I talk about, because I'm not talking to everybody. I'm talking to
Mm.
a very small focused subset of people that I know already has the money to pay me. So that's part of what the strategy kind of walks people through, is like, how do you make those decisions, and who are the right people, and what do they want, and like all that fun stuff.
Okay, again, so just for me to understand, so your agency, what you're doing is you're helping also in the strategy, the full strategy. So for example, if I came to you, I'm a coach and I want to start this podcast, but again, as always, we're all confused, we're all overwhelmed because, we have to do everything. We have to be janitors, marketers, coffee makers, and CEOs at the same time as entrepreneurs, right? Like,
That's
we
right.
have to do everything. So we're already overwhelmed and we don't know how to start a podcast and what to do with it. You help in this regard and how to strategize. How do you say it in English?
Strategize. Yeah.
Exactly this word. Yeah. So I'm thinking Arabic and English together. So you have to
Yeah.
like understand how words are coming out. So you help them in this way, like how to think, because again, also with the podcast, as you were saying, seriously, it's a whole strategy that you have to be really laser focused on how to do it and how to grow it. Otherwise, it will be just also another, maybe, I don't say it's a
Yeah.
waste of time, but like it's a lot of energy, because sometimes I
It
heard
can
that
get
it's a
frustrating.
big percentage of people will give up after the 7th episode of podcasting. So
Yeah. It's true.
yes.
And it's unfortunate, but I understand why they do it. And if your podcast is not giving back to you, like in
Mm.
energy and in money, it's going to start to affect you. It will start to ruin your enjoyment of your own show. And I've
Yeah.
watched it with people. I've been through cycles of that myself with my original podcast, where I would, for a while I'd really enjoy it, and then I wouldn't enjoy it, and then like it kind of it ebbs and flows. And so I don't want people to get into something where they commit to doing something that's every single week, and 6 months from now they're going, hey, this is not worth it, I want to quit.
Mm.
And if you're not careful, it's easy to get into that situation, because if you think that podcasting is a magic solution all by itself, and all you do is you launch a podcast where you're interviewing people, and there's no point of view and there's no cohesive belief system that you're trying to instill in the listeners,
Yeah.
and you're not
Yeah.
leading them in a very specific way to where they know exactly what next step you want them to take, which is probably buying something from you. Unless you
Mm.
have all that stuff lined up, at some point you're going to start to resent your own show, and you won't even want to show up and do your own episodes, which that
Yeah.
is not a fun position to be in. Trust me,
I know.
you do not want to be that way. And so, yeah, so we do all that in the agency, but that's also part of why I wrote the book. Is there's some things that it just takes a while to work out. Right. We can help a lot with the strategy of the podcast when you come in and work with us as a client. But
Mm.
if your business behind the podcast is wildly unfocused, there's only so
True.
much we can do,
Of
right? So
course.
we can still help you in the sense that we can like build a podcast that gives you freedom to kind of figure some of those things out along the way. But ideally, if you come before you even launch a podcast and you have the business where the business is based on an idea that's razor sharp, clear, and very, very compelling, then when you start a podcast, the podcast flows naturally and it starts to reach the right people, and it's easy. It should be easy. And if it's not
Mm.
easy, something's wrong.
Yeah. Matt, if people want to get your book, because I'm really also very, very interested to like learn more about this, where can we find it?
Well, Amazon is always a great place, depending on the
Okay.
country and
Mm.
stuff like that. But if
Mm.
you're in the States, you can just go to microfamousbook.com. You can buy it directly through me and get it for half the price of Amazon. And
Mm.
I'll just ship you the book. Basically, I'll pay the cost of the book if you pay for the cost of shipping. So it's like
Okay.
$7.50 or whatever just to get it into your hands. It's $14 on Amazon, and it's available, pretty much internationally. So if you're an international listener, Amazon's
Hmm.
always your best bet.
Do you have an ebook version, or do you have a downloadable version?
We do, yeah. There's Kindle and paperback.
Oh, awesome. Okay.
Yeah.
So I'm happy because now I think I can just get it immediately. I don't have to, because most of
Yeah,
the books that I
exactly.
order, they just get lost in the way. So yeah.
Do they? That's unfortunate.
Yeah. Most of them, they get lost. I get some, but most of them, they
That's
get
crazy.
returned. Yeah. Well, we spoke about how crazy is it in here.
Yeah,
So
exactly.
this is like the
Yeah, it's
least
too bad.
thing to worry about. But so the theme of this show, the Entrepreneur Accelerator, to be honest, the whole theme of my show, when I created it first, it's because um, I I've been an entrepreneur for almost 5 years, and I had to it took me a lot to figure out so many things. And as I told you, like sometimes we think that we're superheroes, we have to figure everything by ourselves and we have to do everything at the same time. But then we had to take a lot of courses and coaching and mentoring and learning and like constantly adopting things, new things, until you figure out that it's just maybe about taking action consistently and winning. But there are also things that um, can help you if you know about it from the beginning. Like you would avoid so many mistakes. And in my case, I wish that what I know now, like I knew before. So the theme of this show is how to accelerate success in terms of anything related to mindset, because again, success has so many it comes in different shapes and forms, and it has so different meanings for everyone. But again, it's all about mindset, momentum, marketing, a lot of things. In your own words, what do you think is the number one thing that would help an entrepreneur succeed, or succeed fast, without wasting years? What is the number one thing that helped you, at least? and would inspire others?
Okay. Well, knowing what I know now about hiring people and
Mm,
how relatively easy it is to kind of fill in your weaknesses by hiring people who are strong in those areas. I really think that entrepreneurs, in order to be successful, you only really need one big spike of strength. And if you're going to have one big spike, it might as well be in marketing, right?
mm,
And so if you're going to study something that will make you better at marketing, that would be copywriting. So for
oh,
me, there was a time a couple of years in my agency where I realized that the agency only needed three things from me, and it was strategy, copywriting, and project management. And even a lot of the project management I've been able to hand off to somebody who I pay, right? And I
yeah,
think we as entrepreneurs, it's very easy to take on that mentality that I have to do it all and I have to wear all these different hats. And I don't think that's
yeah,
actually true. I think we take that on to ourselves as a misconception. I think we really only need to be good at marketing. If you're good at marketing, you can pay somebody else to do all the other things: financial, back end,
I agree.
operations, delivery, whatever, right? And so if you have one big spike, and if that spike is getting people to buy stuff, that's going to make your life a lot easier. And then you can hire people along the way to do all the other things that you're not as good at.
I love it, because it was one of the killing mistakes that I have done at the beginning, which is, again, thinking that I have to know and do everything by myself.
Yeah.
And I realized that, seriously, it's just do what you do best and outsource the rest. This is what
Mhm.
everybody has to think about and do. Love it. Thank you so much. Like, it was really interesting. Matt, if people want to know more about you, where can they find you?
Very easy. Getmicrofamous.com. So that links out to all, I'm pretty much active on Facebook. We've got a link to our Facebook community there, links out to the book, links to the podcast. So just one central place, getmicrofamous.com.
Love it. Thank you so much. I'm super happy that we had this conversation today.
Me too.
Thank you for being in the Entrepreneur Accelerator, and see you soon. Take care.
Appreciate it.
Thanks for listening. If you liked today's episode, would you please take a minute to rate and review my show? That would mean the world to me. And let me know if you have any questions in mind or something that you're struggling with, so I can cover in future episodes. And don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss out. Let's accelerate your success together. And remember, success is not an accident. Success is a choice. See you next time.